Wow, welcome back. And I appreciate you hanging in there at my first attempt at a screen-o-matic thing. I must admit, this is a really cool deal. I actually can see me flipping my classroom real easy with a program like this. It is free. And this is the free version. I did look over my part one, and I apologize. Sometimes the screen is over some of the words, so I'm going to make sure I only have it on when it's needed. And I like I said, I think anybody thinks they look and sound goofy in person, but or on video. So I'm going to go ahead and take that off. And here we go. We're going to go actually apply all these things. That was a whole lot of 15 minutes for all the way from 670 Highly to Torrance and whatnot. Really quickly, I just wanted to touch base on this screen one more time. When we talk about FIFO, it's really fluency, elaboration, originality, flexibility. You put those acronyms together any way you want to. I tell my students I call it FIFO, just based on a school I used to work with where when we taught creativity, we had to call it FIFO. Anyway, with that in mind, let's move on about how Torrance is usually utilized really quickly, and some of these things we can talk about. What he proposed was to give kids, don't really ever give them the answers, let them come up with the answers. These are things I think a lot of us do naturally anymore. There's not too many teachers that just sit there and do straight lecture, but usually we do some sort of Socratic questioning, but make sure that they don't have the things there for them. Asking an open-ended question sometimes breaks it open. Yesterday I pulled one. What would happen if the Earth were bigger? What would be some of the things that would be different? The students in my tiered lesson, the students who just already knew a lot about the planets, that was some of the things they were doing. They were designing. One of their choices was to design an amusement park ride on another planet, or to alter a planet in some way. While it looks like I'm real creative coming up with these ideas, it was essentially doing the second piece, utilizing Scamper. Scamper is a trick that I have a link to a Scamper activity on Moodle, where it's an acronym for various ways that we can take a problem and look at it in different ways. For instance, the Scamper, this is inventing a new type of wristwatch. You can substitute something new. That'd be one way we could look at it differently. Use natural wood or rocks instead of steel or material. Or we can combine ideas from different places, create a space for easy instant access to medications when alarm goes off. We can adapt it. Use the wristwatch as a reflective mirror when lost to different things. And you can magnify, minimize, or modify things. Make the wristwatch larger, smaller, or whatever. In my case, I was with a planet. I had decided to do that with the planet. Put to other uses. Friend the watch for his work of art. Just asking kids to do these things. It's a pretty straightforward way of getting it done. And asking, while it makes me sound like I'm asking insightful questions, ultimately I'm just stealing Scamper stuff and not doing that much at all. Anyway, with that in mind, the thing that Torrance brings in, the idea of incubation time, ultimately he felt from his research, it wasn't just him philosophically shooting things out, that creativity takes incubation time, that really good ideas take sleep, you think sleep it over or let it sit in your brain for a while. And the argument would be that nowadays perhaps our brain still works on these problems even when we're not thinking about it, but he had the word incubation time to allow time for kids to think through. And we're going to see, if you actually, I have a link, the educational leadership had a creativity issue last year, this time, I think it was February 2013, where Susan Brookhart, and we'll refer to her a little later, has all kinds of different ideas of using Torrance in the classroom, and especially where the hard part about this, she hits the assessment piece. How do you assess creativity? Okay, I apologize for that. I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead. There's a 7-stage process defined by Parnes. I think ultimately it's easy just to remember Parnes is that he's the guy that coined the word brainstorming. He kind of got the whole divergent thinking movement going, where for a long time creativity was really we need to let kids think of as many different ideas as possible, no idea too stupid or whatever. And eventually, though, that's been matured and it's taken on to evolve into a way where there's to what we're going to see right now, sort of a 4-step version that we do in the classroom. One of them is obviously to define the problem. It's a sort of a, what is the problem? My students had a great example of this when they were trying to figure out, we were using parachutes and we were attaching them to the ceiling and releasing them from the ceiling and timing how long they'd hit the ground. Then we'd cut a hole in the parachute and see how long it would take again. And the idea was, I think we were testing the hypothesis, was it a curvilinear relationship, the bigger the hole, the amount of time, or was it a linear relationship? And the point was they were having a problem with was timing it. And so our problem was, how can we time these things accurately? We could use a stopwatch, but there was always a little bit of leeway in there, human error. And so it was determined, well, let's go ahead and think of ways we can solve this problem. We could use multiple stopwatches and take an average, or we could take like 3 stopwatches and use whatever time was in the middle. They eventually came up with this idea of videotaping, or using their iPad and recording it, and they could actually use the time base on the timer on the video to figure out to the 10th of a second when they dropped it, when they landed it. So the whole thing was a CPS, mini CPS activity right there. They defined the problem, they brainstormed solutions, and they found a solution. Usually that acceptance finding piece, it has an outside criteria. So that's the 3 stages. It's obvious is what it is. Once again, I apologize. I'm going to butt in there real quick. I just wanted to make sure that we also know that this is just one point view. When you Google creative problem solving, you're going to find that there's a lot of different versions. This is sort of a meltdown of what they all sort of follow the same pattern, is what they eventually do. They define there's always a defining the problem, brainstorming solutions, and then solution finding and acceptance finding. Usually there's some sort of outside criteria. What we're adding here is there has to be some place where they actually reflect on the process. This is a very important piece to the creative problem solving method, is the reflection piece, and probably the less intuitive one. Let's take a look at some examples really quickly just to show you what I mean. This is a program where students were asked to invent something 20 years in the future, and then they kind of had to go back and look at the steps it would take to get there with something. For instance, there are some students that invented this idea of making fillings, dental fillings that would monitor carbohydrate intake and whatnot, and then it would beam it back to, or Bluetooth it back to a device so kids could monitor their sugar levels, that way. And that was their idea to help diabetics. Well, so they had to, not only did they build that solution to a problem, they had to, what kind of technology would it take to get there, and did all this, but a big piece of it was the design process part, and they had to reflect on that and write about what they were doing. And it wasn't always easy for them to do. In this case, they were actually asked, what were some things you chose not to do and why, and what was the process that you were using. Another one, Explorer Vision, by the way, they're difficult people to deal with. I really don't know about using them again, but as far as help and, I hate to say customer service, it's a free program, but yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not endorsing them. I'm just saying that's a good example. One I would endorse is eCyber Mission. You need to go out and find a problem in the world and use science to solve it. That's essentially what they ask you to do. They guide the whole process through with questions that kids answer. It's very teacher friendly. I mean, essentially, you say, here's the program, read the directions, and go. But in my students last year, I had some students, they each took home $500 from this. They did a really good job with their solution to a problem. But there is a piece there that asks them to go back and reflect on what they did. How did you do it? What were you doing? How did you solve the problem? And then We Can Save the World by Siemens Corporation, once again, is a similar one. You need to go out and find a solution to a real world problem using science. So, for instance, some students read that, I can't remember what was it, if this is Siemens Corporation or not. It was one where some of my students recognized that the school shut down all the lights during Christmas when they had a Christmas tree up, so that the lights of the Christmas tree would be brighter. They became curious as to how much energy we were saving by doing that, and so they put together this. That was their project, and they did very well with it. But they didn't win. But they did close. They did all the math. They even prompted the assistant principal to call the county office and find out what the electric bill was, which was $12,000 a month. And even send an email out to the whole school saying, "Hey, we've got to do something about this." But they actually did the math and everything, and In the process, though, part of that they had to write about what they were doing and what were they thinking, what were some of the challenges and adjustments they had to make along the way. So those are 3 good examples of processes that are out there from professionally done programs. How do you apply creative problem in our lesson that we're actually going to do? Ultimately, it's similar to other lesson plans. This aspect asks that the problem-solving task be designed for use in your classroom, if possible. If it's really possible, can do it real quickly in the next 4 weeks. I don't know if that's actually feasible or not. Let's move on. We're going to go ahead. The rubric basically asks us to have kids identify a problem in the real world and solve that problem. The more that they do, the better. And that's what the rubric basically says. Let me bring you to the rubric. I realize you see a yellow circle. The only real downside of this program that I'm using is that I can't see that. I have no idea. But the lesson requires students to identify a problem to be solved, make a solution, and come to an understanding of the process, reflect on the process. Sort of like the truncated method I showed you. The assessment piece we'll look at here in a second. It's the trickiest part. How do you assess creativity? And it's never perfect and not easy. I'll show you some ways that can be done, but that'll come up. And then application. This lesson is developed for use in the designer's classroom and can be used by others. It's just, is it doable? And then it says to get a 3 on there, designer taught the lesson, provides an analysis of the results. That would be a little bit difficult to do in the time frame that we have, but I guess some people might be able to do that. Let's look at the assessment piece though really quickly. There are many ways you can assess creativity, but I don't think any of them are ever going to be entirely accurate because it's not an easy construct to nail down. But we are talking about, when we talk about creativity, we're talking about creating, not necessarily the artsy or the flair that's in a project. I have so many students, when they put together a PowerPoint, they have all kinds of singing or whatever. Not that so much. It's, did they create something, and how did they create that piece? And so the actual assessment of creativity, Susan Brookart offers some ideas of how you might want to put it in a rubric and to guide kids into being more creative. And hopefully when you look at this rubric, you'll see pieces of Osborne and Parnes, you'll see pieces of Torrance, and you'll even see pieces of Success Me Highly in there. You wouldn't have to use all of these, but you can use one of them. Let me just show you. I'll start up here, and I'm going to have this online, so you won't be able to be flipping back and forth. This whole PowerPoint. She suggests, one way we can evaluate creativity is using a variety of ideas and contexts. Her being very creative in this domain would be ideas represent a startling variety of important concepts from different contexts and disciplines. Creative ideas represent important concepts from different contexts or disciplines. So when they solve a problem, where are the ideas coming from? And are they coming from different contexts? A variety of sources that people use. They bring in a bunch of different sources. So when they're creating, say, like a book report, that would be part of creativity. Combining ideas. Bringing ideas from different ways to solve an original problem. Once again, that's from Torrance, I'm almost certain. And then communicating something new. Create a product that is interesting, new, or helpful in making an original contribution for its intended purpose. And that would be sort of a modern view of what this is. This is the hardest part I'm having to communicate, because the assessment piece is amorphous at best, and there's a lot of different ways of doing it. So I don't think that would be one thing I would be rating highly, but I would ask you to try and to see what you can come up with, just so you can get a sense of the challenge that's there with trying to assess creativity. Or maybe you'll get it right off the bat. Maybe it's just something that I struggle with my stuff. Anyway, that's all I have, and so I just want to review really quickly, since I have 20 seconds, that ultimately we're trying to set up a lesson that has a scenario where kids are trying to solve a problem. They have to brainstorm, and they have to kind of come up with a decision based on that brainstorming, and a little piece where they reflect back on how they did that and what they did. That's really all that's there. If there are any questions or anything of that nature, please feel free to email me. I'm going to go ahead and try to shoot out a couple emails to clarify things. I appreciate you bearing with me. This was my first time, and I'm trying to smile the whole time. But good luck, and we will see you later.